not going to touch that other issue. Gateway?
Firmly on the sidelines.
And for those of you that don't know me, I guess most of the room probably hide obscurity. My name is Dennis Mars, and I'm a past president of the, past president of the Chamber of Commerce in 2007, a member of the Board of Governors, and I have the very honorable position of co-chairing the Public Policy Committee with Richard Rainey for the Tri-Cities Chamber of Commerce.
My colleagues, I think that one of the things about the Tri-Cities is really the quality over time, on all sides of the political spectrum, of its political representation. I think some very unique and interesting figures have come from the Tri-Cities, and I'll leave you to imagine who I'm thinking of. But also just the quality of representation. At the provincial level, many people who represented their communities as councillors and as mayors. And we think of my colleagues, Joe Tressolini and Mike Farnworth and Diane Thorne, and many other people, including people who are running for office for the Liberal Party and other parties, such as Linda Ryan, have come through city councils that have worked together well in the public interest, often across partisan lines. And it's a great community here. It reflects, I think, the communities of the Tri-Cities, what's happened over time in British Columbia, which is enormous progress. I mean, think of the community, you think of the city of Coquitlam, where we are today, and its growth over time. It's significant and remarkable growth over time. You know, when you look at decade by decade, where we go from 8,000 people in the 1970s to 24,000 more people in the 1980s and 28,000 more people in the 1990s to 14,000 more people in the last decade in the city of Coquitlam. Consistent growth, you know, and in the whole region, this is the whole region, a similar phenomenon where 20,000 people in the three communities came here, added to the population in the 1970s, and then 45,000 in the 1980s, and then 39,000 in the 1990s, and 24,000 in the last decade. And that reflects, over time, different provincial governments, different federal governments, different municipal governments, the dynamic growing communities that we live in, and that people not just want to live in, but want to come and participate in as well. It reflects the general economic situation of the province as well. We've seen somewhat of a decline in population growth here over the last decade, as we've seen a decline in economic growth over the last decade, but consistent growth nonetheless over different periods and different times. If you look at the activities of the community, I was talking to Richard Stewart, who I worked with in past capacity as Executive Director of Canadian Parents for French. The idea of French immersion was born here in the city of Coquitlam in my outfield, of course, but that idea has come forward, and now 45,000 students are enrolled in French immersion program everywhere in the province. It started in Coquitlam because people came together. It didn't start because government from the top said this has to happen. It didn't start because of Pierre Trudeau or official bilinguals. It started because people in the community thought it would be a good idea to advance second language education in the community. And the fact that my ideal has a French connection, that Coquitlam has a French connection, made it happen. Not that kind of French connection, Richard. Not that kind of French connection. The better kind. Better kind. And so you see that developing. You see things like the Close Meridian Overpass, which the current council and mayor and council have put together. An idea that is, in fact, came together from the whole community, and the whole community, let's face it, is contributing to it, along with TransLink. An idea that's improved congestion issues in that community a great deal. You see it in other proposals. The city of Parmini was the first city, I think, to ban cosmetic pesticides and take an environmental leadership position that has been followed throughout the province. But what we see in this community as it works at the grassroots level, and even at the chamber here, where the focus on youth mentorship is something that the whole community benefits from. The idea that our future nonprofit directors and our future small business leaders and business leaders in general require support and mentorship, and that the Chamber of Commerce, including pursuing its other goals, is focused on that, shows what the community can do together. The labor movement and the business community working together on the United Way. I think what it tells us is that the quality of life and the quality of public participation in our communities everywhere in British Columbia, but here in the Tri-Cities in particular, is not well reflected in our political debate. And I think that has to change. Now, as you know, we're entering into an election period in British Columbia. And the Liberal Party and its friends have run one or two negative ads about, well, me. I'm worried they're going to produce a monster movie about me soon, and I won't feel badly about that as long as it's not made in Ontario. The reality is, though, is this, and we know this from our politics, that Premier Clark and Ms. Sturck, the leader of the Green Party, with very little resources, got 134,000 votes province-wide in the last election, and Mr. Cummins are people who want to contribute to public life, and they do so with enormous energy. We know this in our local campaigns, because sometimes you win and sometimes you lose, and we in the NDP, we know that all too well. The reality is that when people run in local campaigns in the community, and we know this, and my friend Doug Horn, since the Liberal Party knows this, in Quedlinburg, he knows this as well, that in every campaign we run in, there are a lot of people who run. There are often 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 candidates, and most of them lose. By definition, most of them lose. There is only one winner in our system, and that's what happens. The people who run and lose get nothing from it. Perhaps a little bit of ego gratification, from time to time a little bit of ego deflation as well, but they contribute to our democracy. And I think the time has passed when we should be attacking people personally who are contributing to making our communities better. And I'm not going to do it. But I have selfish reasons for this. I think that if you look at recent election campaigns, we were talking at the table, Mike Clay and I were talking at the table about this. 79% of people didn't vote in the last election in Fort Moody. Province-wide in the last municipal elections in the fall of 2011, 71% of people didn't vote. That's 1.9 million people in the communities. There were a significant number of communities where there was no election because of defamation. That's 71% of people didn't vote in their municipal election. In the last provincial election, 1.7 million people didn't vote who were eligible to vote. 1.4 who were registered didn't vote. 300,000 are eligible but not registered. 1.7 million people didn't vote. And that adds up to, if you add it all in, 55% of the eligible voting population. And the challenge, I think, in politics today is that our issues are more complex. If you look at transportation or housing, issues that matter to everybody who lives in Metro Vancouver. Everybody who lives in the Tri-Cities thinks about these issues. They know about the Murray-Clark Connection. They know about Coast Meridian. They know about the Evergreen Line. They know about the impact of commuter rail. These are crucial issues for them. And the housing issues beside that, other than hockey, probably our #1 sport. These issues require complicated leadership, people working together for change, and a politics that is increasingly personal and nasty doesn't foster that after elections. We've seen this in the United States. President Obama was elected in 2008. His party won over 60% of the seats in the Senate, 258 out of 435 seats in the House of Representatives. And he couldn't get his agenda through because politics there, even though there was a consensus in the electorate that that's the direction they should go in, didn't allow for that. A broken political system meant years of wrangling at a time when their economy and their government was in deficit in the trillions and at war in 2 places across the globe. So we got to do better. I think the third reason, the fact that issues are complex, the fact that the lower participation in our politics gives all of us less of a mandate, no matter what party we represent, to bring change and to make tough decisions. The third reason I think we need to change it is that the debate is terrible. I mean, the quality of our debate doesn't reflect the quality of our community. We have a debate in BC, people say, about the 1990s. You don't see it in TV ads. People left BC in the 1990s. That's what they say. You elect the NDP, people will leave BC. Well, what are the facts? The facts are that in the 1990s, 128,000 more people came to BC than left BC for other provinces. In the last decade, 58,000 more people came to BC than left BC for other provinces. Also pretty good. Approximately half as good, but pretty good. Every quarter, since the current Premier, Premier Clark, became Premier, more people have left than have come. So the standard television ad you might run is to say, Premier Clark became Premier, and people are leaving British Columbia. But we know in our hearts, and we know as a practical matter, that that link is not that direct. And that would be the wrong thing to communicate. We need to have a better debate about why people might leave and stay. What are the circumstances of our economy? That's the debate we need to have. And not name-calling about circumstances that often are beyond the control of governments. So what do we do in this time? We obviously have to build on our strengths of the problem, particularly our economic strength. You see in the community all the time, of course there are people, and it's diversity. We can start there. That British Columbia, at this point in its history, is open to immigration and investment, is a massive competitive advantage we have over other jurisdictions. And this wasn't always the case in British Columbia, as we know. In the period prior to 1945, but really in the period prior to 1968, we had immigration policies that limited economic growth in our province because, in some cases, those policies were racist. They were certainly restrictive of people coming into our country to contribute, to raise their families, to vote, to participate, and so on. We know, for example, after the war in 1945, that in British Columbia, Japanese Canadians who were born in Canada were only able to return to the coast in July 1949. Whereas in the state of Washington, they returned to the coast in 1945. And that very fact, that approach to immigration negatively affected economic growth because it also reflected an approach to investment which was negative as well. Today, we have a different approach. An enormously diverse and dynamic communities in this community. We don't have hard to understand the role, for example, of Korean Canadians in this community is significant and a source of enormous benefit to everyone. The people from all over the world, from Iran, from China, from Taiwan, from India, from all over the world have come and settled here and contributed, as my parents did from Ireland a long time ago. Big advantage for us. Our position in the world is a big advantage. We have access to the Asia-Pacific market and access to successive premiers. And all of them deserve credit for this. From Dave Barrett, the first premier of British Columbia to go to China, to Premier Clark, who went to China herself. All of those premiers deserve credit for over a consistent period under several parties promoting that relationship, the economic and political relationship in the Pacific Rim. And of course, our proximity to the American market continues to be a benefit, and we hope will be a greater benefit as the United States emerges from its current economic difficulties and gives opportunities to us as well. We have a land base that is extraordinary in the size of our population and can benefit us in the long term. These are our benefits, and to some degree they provide us with insulation in difficult economic times. So as I say, we've had fairly consistent economic growth over time. If you think of this in the 10 years, the 16 years of social credit government, average economic growth 2.8%. 10 years of NDP government, average economic growth of 3%. 10 years of Liberal government, average economic growth of between 2.2 and 2.4% in that range. Those are the period. So it's been consistent, but we know as well that in the in years, that's over 10 years it's been consistent, but we have an economy because of the resource base that can fluctuate dramatically in the short term. Those are our advantages, and they are real, and they should be celebrated by everybody involved in politics. But at the same time, we have, I think, 4 sets of significant challenges that I think should be the key issues in the coming elections. The first is that we are less productive than we should be, and we need to be as an economy. Our productivity, for example, in the last 6 years, has been half of the Canadian average. We used to be one of the most productive provinces in the country. We're now in the second tier of that, the second half of that. in productivity, and Canada is less productive than the world, and that is a problem for our economy. To sum it up really succinctly, we don't make things anymore, and we don't raise their value enough in our economy, and that is a long-term challenge. The second challenge, and it's obvious if you live anywhere in Metro Vancouver, but anywhere around the province, is that there is enormous pressure on the middle class. We have higher rates of inequality in British Columbia than they have in any other province in the country. Sometimes people talk about this in terms of the child poverty rate, but I'm talking about something quite different. The top 20% of income earners and the bottom 20% of income earners. There's just a report by the Conference Board of Canada that spoke to these issues and the damage that can cause to the economy. In BC, the top 20% of income earners after taxes, after the application of the progressive tax system, take home 45% of the after-tax income, and the bottom 20% takes home 4.5% of the after-tax income. Now, the bottom 20% of income earners in an economy of a society of 4 million represent 800,000 people. So we're not talking about the very important issues of street homelessness here. We're talking about a broader shift in the economy. And the challenges of middle-income people at these times are significant, and they're in many ways closer to what we used to think of as the challenges of the low-income people. This affects us in every way. As many of you know, here on this side, we just built the Port Mann Bridge. The government just built and opened the Port Mann Bridge. And we're hopeful and optimistic about its long-term success as a bridge, notwithstanding some of the difficulties it's had. The average person going over that bridge, once the full toll comes into effect, will pay $1,500 a year in tolls. Take that every day by saying $3. The average person in that region pays $1,600 in provincial income tax. That's a very significant increase at a time when there's real pressure on people and incomes. That's on the tax side. Most of the pressure is on the income tax side. A whole bunch of jobs that used to exist. 35,000 fewer people working in forestry than 10 years ago. Those were primarily middle-class jobs lost. And while you could say that that's the current government's fault, in fact, that reflects a broader challenge in the economy than any other over that period. We're losing middle-class jobs. And that's a challenge for everyone because they're the bulwark of communities. So that's a second challenge. Because really, the growth of inequality in the world is related to the increasing role of technology. And the people who succeed are the people who are given the power of the education over that technology, and that's important. And the third set of problems we face are problems of sustainability, which are significant ones. You know, there are timber supply areas in BC where 90% of the trees are dead. This is related to pine beetle and climate change. And so the connection for those people, you don't have to go to those communities and tell people there's a connection between the economy and the environment. You certainly don't have to talk to people who are mayors and representing people in our region to know the importance in this community. It's always been important. And things, it's not to say some improvements haven't occurred. In fact, they have. Someone who has mild asthma, I enjoy life for much more than I used to. I was working here, I worked here in the late 1980s in Portland. But we have challenges and changes that are fundamental to our life and our economy. And the final question for all provincial parties is surely, how do we pay for things? How do we come together and pay for things? For example, the Port Mann Bridge is a real challenge, but how do we pay for things in a society? The current government has run 4 consecutive deficit budgets. First one, at the time of the last election, was supposed to be $495 million. It proved to be 5 times that, but they campaigned that it was $495 million. We've seen an increase in debt and deficit. We see governments making announcements that go out to 2015 and 16 and 17, and we have real challenges ahead of us. Just give a sense of it. In this year, the government's going to suggest that it's balancing the budget. In fact, what we're going to see this year is a massive and unprecedented sale of government assets in 1 year to claim a balanced budget in that year. Meaning, since you can't sell an item twice, that won't be available in the subsequent years. $750 million. On top of that, they've moved some sales into the fiscal year to create a one-time infusion of cash to claim a balanced budget in an election. Now, governments have always bought and sold assets. That makes sense. Translink does it, everyone does it. All governments do it. They exchange assets sometimes. But for deficit purposes, for political purposes, sell out assets For example, in the city of Surrey, where I think it's fair to say they're going to see population growth into the future of 100,000 people a decade, simply does not make sense. Equally, yesterday we learned through the application of BC Hydro to the Canadian environmental process around the Site C dam that the government is going to lose in the 4 years upcoming after this fiscal year $1 billion the decisions made to buy expensive private power. We'll have to account for that. And there's one more thing, so we can go on a list. In 2014-15, the federal government is going to effectively cut the Canada Health Transfer. We've had 6% increases every year for the last 10 years in the Canada Health Transfer. In nominal terms, that Canada Health Transfer increase will be 0 in 2014-15. And there are, as we know, enormous demands in healthcare. So what does that tell us? What should the political debate be about? Well, I think what we need to do is do important things, but not too many of them in these times. We've got to decide in these times that there are priorities, and then there are other things that we might support and are good for the community that are not priorities. I will say, in that category, I believe, includes government advertising, and shows at BC Place 2 days before the election campaign. I think those are things that one might exclude, but that's to overstate their value. Even those two projects, even the money they spent on government advertising recently, and the Bollywood show that they're promoting now are just $26 million in a budget of the tens of billions of dollars. These times require us to be clear about what we're going to do, things that we support, but we can only do when money becomes available, and things that we oppose. And here's what I think. I think to address issues of productivity and inequality, we have to focus on skills training. And there's a real difference between the NDP and the government on this question. As you know, in the last budget, really the only thing, and it was bragged about in the budget, that the government cut in nominal terms going forward was the Ministry of Advanced Education, and effectively budget for skills training. I don't think that was the right approach, and clearly they've changed their view on it, at least in their advertising, since then. We have an apprenticeship system in British Columbia where completion rates are 37%. In the last year we have statistics, and it appears in the current year they're going to drop to 35% completion rates. We have an apprenticeship system at a time when we are demanding, begging for skilled employees, which is in decline. So we've got to make this choice now, it seems to me. Every business meeting I go to, and in 2012 I had 200 plus meetings with people from the business community tell me the top priority is the skills shortage for them in their businesses. Manufacturers say we could hire people today if we had the appropriate skilled workers. In the forest industry, they haven't hired anyone in 10 years. They need skilled workers. In mining, we see that, and we see that debate publicly in the debate about HD International, for example. The lack of skilled workers, the condition of skilled workers is crucial to our economy. So we have to take steps. So specifically, I propose measures to ensure that young people are not denied access to the middle-class jobs that will support them in the future because they don't have enough money at 18. We're going to reinstate non-refundable student grants. And we're going to say how we pay for it. Reinstating the minimum tax on the big banks. We have to increase spaces in our trades and apprenticeship system. That's clear. We have to go in a different direction to meet the skill shortage that's facing our economy right now. We have to return and restore compulsory trade. This past week, I went to Calgary, Alberta, as Red Hart would say. And I went and saw SAIT, which is the South Alberta Institute of Technology. In Alberta, they didn't do what we did here. They maintained their apprenticeship system, they maintained compulsory trades, and they, in Alberta, with 10% of the national workforce, produced 20% of the apprentices in the country. I think we have to look around and find the right solutions, the best solutions, not the solution. And if those solutions come from conservative Alberta, that's okay with me. We have to focus on that. In a time when we don't have enough money to redistribute wealth, we need to redistribute wealth by giving young people the means to succeed. And that means succeed in a modern economy has to be education and skills, whether it be in technology or cultural industries, whether it be mining or forestry. That's the first thing we can do. The second thing I think we have to do is ensure that all the money government spends, all of the money government spends in a time when we're running deficit budgets and municipal governments are facing the consequences of those deficit budgets, meaning the withdrawal of senior levels of government from important levels of services in their communities. And the pressure comes to municipal governments first at that time, at the time when we're seeing that, we've got to ensure when government spends money, it benefits the community. And that means when we purchase food in our hospitals, it should be as much as possible to support local agricultural communities, local farmers. The idea that in the Okanagan we don't produce local food and we'll use local tree fruits in our hospitals doesn't make sense to us. When you're going to spend money, it should have the maximum footprint in communities. And that goes for procurement, that goes for construction, and so on. It doesn't make sense for us not to fully benefit in a time of scarce resources of the actions of government spending. And finally, I think we have to address issues of sustainability and infrastructure. These are really environmental issues as much as economic issues in a more serious way. And I think you and I and everyone are frustrated by what's gone on at Transit, the governance situation at Transit. There was a significant change made in 2008 because the provincial government was unhappy with the way the mayors were making decisions. So they responded to that by changing the system, but I think it's fair to say that that change hasn't benefited the region, hasn't benefited Vancouver, and hasn't benefited other communities across the province. So what I've said is pretty clear. We have to ensure that the provincial government comes into the debate with more than just lectures. The provincial government comes into the debate with some money from the carbon tax. As you know, the current government, the Liberal government, to its credit, I think, introduced the carbon tax. There was a campaign in the last election. We didn't like it because of its impact on inequality. They won the election. The carbon tax is here to stay. What's true about the carbon tax is not one penny of it goes to any environmental initiative. Not a centime, not even a ruble goes into it. And that, I think, needs to change. The provincial government has to come to that debate with clean hands and contribute to the solutions, not just here in Metro Vancouver, but around the province. As we know, there's a community that's depends often on tourism and on seniors, a community that's been on a boil water advisory for months. We have to be able to address these infrastructure problems if we're going to continue to live well. Those, I think, are the priorities we face. Specific proposals, thoughtful proposals, but not too many. Because if you're going to bring significant change in some areas, there's some areas that you're going to have to put off until you have the resources to address them. My mom and dad came to Canada in the 1950s. And for the 40-odd years from 1969 when we moved to Vancouver, they operated a small business. My dad retired at 81. My mom retired at 76. He was the president. She was the vice president in the even years. And then in the odd years, they switched. He retired at 81. My mom retired at 76 because they loved what they did. They ran a small business and they raised us, and they could not have been more generous to us as parents. Sometimes and often I reflect now as to whether we could have sacrificed more for them than they did, because they sacrificed everything for us. They still do, in fact, even in retirement. The reason they ran their businesses for so long, I go around Vancouver and I run into people who say hi to your dad for me, we really miss him. Because their community, the people, as is the case with many of your businesses, the people that they worked with in business were kind of their family. That's why they kept doing it so long. I think that we have an obligation in these times to have a serious debate in politics, to be true to what they did. They made lives better for their children than they were for them. And we as communities have to make lives better for our children and grandchildren than they are for us now. Which requires us, I think, in these times, to be more generous with one another, to be hard on issues, to have great debates about the choices facing us as communities, but to be generous to one another in those debates. I think people involved in public life should respect the institutions of public life. And that's what I would hope to do as Premier. And anyone who knows Selena Robinson, anybody who knows Mike Farmer, anyone who knows Diane Thorne and Joe Trasolini, but also Dennis, who ran for the Liberal Party, and Linda Ryan, knows that they want to be worthy of that too. And that we can do better as a community than we've done in the last decade. So that's what I intend to do, to run, hopefully, in an election campaign that doesn't see an NDP victory because Premier Clark is unpopular, or the Liberals did the HSE, but an election where we win a mandate to bring positive change to our entire province. Thank you for having me.